Part 3. When control turns on itself. Control was never the end. Control was the beginning of the fracture. Part 1 showed how attention becomes power. Part 2 showed how power becomes control. But Part 3 reveals what control always becomes next. Conflict. Not outside, inside. Because the same system that built the empire was never built for relationship. It was built for dominance. And dominance has a cost. It cannot stay contained. It spreads. And eventually, it turns inward. This is where the Murdoch method stops looking like strategy and starts looking like consequence. Because the mechanism that made everything work is the same mechanism that makes everything break. Plausible deniability, distance, silence, indirect control. It worked perfectly in the newsroom. Nothing written, nothing explicit, nothing traceable. Stories get chased, lines get crossed, but the center stays clean. Or at least, it appears to. That is the trick. Power acts without appearing to act. Responsibility exists without ever landing anywhere. Everyone understands the goal. No one says the method. And because no one says it, no one owns it. That is how the system scales. That is how it wins. That is how it becomes untouchable. Until it doesn't. Because what works in the world does not work in a family. And that is the fracture. The same silence that protects power destroys trust. The same distance that keeps hands clean keeps people apart. The same indirect control becomes indirect warfare. And suddenly, the system is no longer managing headlines. It is managing relationships. Badly. The deposition scene makes this undeniable. A son sits in a chair, answering questions, trying to stay composed, trying to stay focused. And across from him sits his father, silent, watching, not speaking, just present. And then it lands. Some of the sharpest questions are not coming from the lawyers. They are coming from him. Not spoken directly, but delivered through others. That is the system now inside the family. No confrontation, no ownership. Just pressure, rooted through intermediaries. That is not a moment. That is the method. The same method that ran the empire. Distance creates protection. Silence creates power. Indirect action creates control. But inside a family, those same tools create something else. Resentment, confusion, isolation. Because when nothing is said directly, nothing can be resolved. When everything is implied, everything becomes personal. When power refuses to speak plainly, it forces everyone else to interpret. And interpretation is where relationships go to die. This is why the fracture was inevitable. Not because something went wrong, but because everything worked exactly as designed. The system rewarded outcomes. It ignored process. It valued winning over clarity. And it trained everyone inside it to operate the same way. Anticipate, infer, act. But never ask too many questions. Never force things into the open. Never make the invisible visible. That is how plausible deniability survives. But that is also how trust disappears. Because trust requires clarity. Trust requires directness. Trust requires someone to actually say what they mean. And this system was never built for that. So when the pressure rises, when the stakes get personal, when the future of the empire is no longer theoretical, the system does what it always does. It protects power, even if it destroys connection. Now the battle is no longer about headlines. It is about inheritance, control of the company, control of the narrative, control of the future. And the same logic applies. Keep things quiet, move strategically, communicate indirectly, control outcomes. But here is the difference. You can win like that in the world. You cannot love like that in a family. And that is the cost. A father trying to extend his control beyond his lifetime. Children being positioned, evaluated, compared, not as sons and daughters, but as successors, as risks, as threats, as assets. And when relationships are filtered through power, they stop being relationships. They become negotiations. That is why the fracture is not loud at first. It is quiet, subtle, strategic. A question asked through a lawyer, a message sent through someone else, a decision made without a conversation. And over time, that silence builds pressure, because everything important remains unsaid, until eventually there is nothing left that can be said directly. Only positions, only sides, only outcomes. That is when the system completes itself. The same machine that controlled the outside world can no longer hold together the inside one. The empire still stands, but the relationships underneath it start to collapse. And this is the part nobody sees coming. Control feels like strength, until it has nowhere left to go but inward. And when it turns inward, it doesn't stabilize. It divides. Because control cannot create unity. It can only manage outcomes. And families are not outcomes. They are relationships. Which means they require the one thing this system was never built to give: truth, spoken directly; ownership, taken clearly; responsibility that cannot be outsourced. Without that, all that remains is power, trying to hold together something it was never designed to protect. And that is the real Murdoch method. It doesn't just build empires. It fractures what's closest to them.